Okay, now let's see if this is working. Hopefully we are going live. Not sure this is live. Hold on, what the fuck? Give me a minute. I'm getting quite confused by YouTube's. Fuck's sake. Why does this make me feel so old and decrepit? All right, so I think I am live, but I think it's not going live on the video that I posted on. For fuck's sake. Okay. All right. I think I am live though. Goddamn fucking modern world. Jesus Christ. Okay, I think I can. Okay, I can see people in the chat now. Ugh, Alex, not sure if this is live. Malpass. Good audio. At least audio is good. I mean, whatever. Fuck it. I am live. Excellent, excellent, excellent. So I hope the audio is silky smooth, silky fucking smooth. I can't think of a better word right now. Excellent. Okay, great. So welcome to another attempt at a live stream. We are going to chat about some more ortho bro pre-sup people. Moving on from Jim Bob last time round, and this guy we're looking at this week is Father Deacon Ananas, who that's obviously not his real name. That's his like title or church name or whatever that is, and he has a real name. I'm not going to dox the guy because I mean it's easy to find him because if you look up his papers, you'll see them on academia, and that's where his actual name will show up. But you know, whatever, he goes by Father Deacon Ananias. Guess it sounds cooler. I'll try and refer to him as FDA because I find it a bit weird calling him Father Deacon. That sounds a bit odd. And he didn't refer to me as doctor when he talked about me. He didn't use my title. But it's not a cool church name like his. So, okay, good. Right. So, just having a look through the chat. I made the mistake last time round of thinking, why does no one ever give me any super chats? What's wrong with this stingy bunch of people who watch my channel? It's just that Riverside, my streaming thing, doesn't show them. I guess there's something different about that. So I thought I would endeavour to keep another window open with the YouTubes up on it. And I think in doing that, what I did was confused myself earlier, and that's why the stream lasted like 1 second. So I'm going to keep this open, see if you ask a super chat. And here we go. Already Modern Atheism has said, here's a little gift. So I can say thank you so much for that gift. And now I look like I'm not completely ungrateful like I was previously, moaning when people were showering with me with money. Anyway, so yes, I could keep saying his name like Jim Bob kept saying my name in the previous episode. So I made that little reel of Jim Bob saying my name. I didn't really point out that like that was all taken from the first like 10 minutes of a stream. And, you know, all of those instances of him saying my name all came from the same like tiny bit. It's crazy. But good, you know, his delivery is impeccable, Jim Bob. Now, let's start off by saying something nice about FDA, because I think that my impression of Jim Bob is that I don't know him very well. Funny guy though he is, I do get the impression that he's not, you know, not particularly. Well, he's somewhat disingenuous. That's just the vibe he gives off. I don't know if he is or not, but I do get that vibe. And then, you know, other people I associate in this crowd are like even less ingenuous than Jim Bob, like Jay Dyer, for instance. I think is like very. It's ingenuous, even though he's disingenuous anyway. And another super chat. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And Anne Stevens, thank you so much for that. Yeah, but FDA comes across as a genuine guy, right? Seems nice. I've never seen him be an asshole to anyone. He doesn't come across like he's faking it for clicks or anything like that. I think he's probably a nice chap. You know, I reckon FDA claims. So I watched a little bit of a video of him debating Matt Slick, which is funny because they're both presuppositionalists, and but one of them's FDA is a Greek Orthodox presup, and Matt Slick is a kind of Calvinist Protestant presup. So it's really funny watching them disagree with each other, whilst also basically just using the same arguments as one another. Anyway, so if you really hate yourself, you can waste 3.5 hours of your precious life watching them attack each other on that stream. I mean, it was quite fun. But anyway, the reason I'm bringing that up is just that at the beginning of that, FDA introduces himself and says that he's got, I think he says he's got a master's degree and a PhD in philosophy. And also he has a master's of divinity, I think, or maybe theology, but it's some kind of ecumenical qualification, degree in theology or an MDiv. But he's also got a PhD in philosophy and a master's degree in philosophy, which is great. But I think that means we need to hold him to a reasonably high standard, because you got the highest possible qualification you can have in philosophy. So I would expect some basic stuff to be done correctly with that. And it's sad to say that there are some like blatantly straightforward things that FDA doesn't do very well in the paper that we're going to look at. And you know, wanted to say some nice things about him to begin with, just to say, like, I'm not just trying to slag him off, but given that he's got a PhD, he's putting himself out there, he's saying he's making these big claims, he's debating people, you know, but it's fair enough, I think, to point out that he's getting some stuff very badly wrong. I'm not drinking whiskey or even alcohol-free beer, just drinking water tonight. Okay. So, what I thought I would do would be, we can have a little look at his paper to begin with. And I've made a couple of slides, and I've got some clips of him talking. Not a huge number, but some, just to sort of back up that I'm not completely taking him out of context. In the original video, which I guess I'll update the description and all that stuff from the other video that I started and then I cancelled, I'd put links in there to the various places that I'd gone to for this, so the content. So there's two very long videos, one of him just talking on his own about the paper, more or less reads the paper out and takes some questions, sort of elaborates a little bit, but broadly speaking, it's just him talking his way through the paper. And then there's another video which was filmed, I think, not so long after that one, where he's going through the paper, but this time with Jay Dyer. Dyer kind of annoyingly sort of talks over him and interrupts him and stuff like that, even though he's sort of ostensibly hosting him, like a someone who's interviewing him. He talks over him and has a much louder volume on his microphone. So it's sort of sometimes Jay's like deafeningly loud as he interjects over the top. Layperson Jay Dyer correcting the PhD philosopher and his friend. I guess he can't help himself. So anyway, you can go to those places to look if you were wondering if I'm taking them out of context or being unfair. Yeah, I urge you to go and double check and let me know if you think I've got something wrong. And obviously, I'm gonna show you his paper. So let me start by sharing my screen. Here we go. So I've got this from his academia page, academia.edu. It's called The Reason for Reasons. You can go and find this. I think you just need to have an account on academia and then you can read stuff on there. Now, so let's get a couple of things out of the way. Is this a published paper? I genuinely don't know. FDA talks about it like his paper, like it's his paper. I mean, he uses this phrase, in my paper, I say that blah, blah, blah. Now, paper is a word that sometimes means, I published a paper in academic circles. That generally tends to mean you've done something like publish it in a journal. It means it has gone through peer review. I guess, there are other ways of using that term. You maybe at school you'd write a paper. I might have called that an essay in the UK, but I think American people call that a paper. You could just write a Word document with stuff in and refer to that as your paper if you want to. I find it's slightly misleading as an academic with a PhD to talk about it as your paper if it's just published on academia. I mean, it's also a blog post here. This is where I first read it. So I don't know whether we should really follow him in calling it a paper. Well, we can do if you like, but I don't know that it's published. Someone in the chat was talking about it as if it was as if they'd been sent it to review or something. So I don't know. It certainly doesn't say anything that I could see on here about where it was published or anything like that. It doesn't have the journal name and the volume number, the page references, got nothing like that. So I don't know. The second thing that's funny is it starts with a quote. The hardest problem is convincing people that the problem is not hard at all, but simple. Well, it doesn't say who the quote's from. I mean, is it supposed to? I mean, this just looks like this is the person who wrote the paper. This is where they work. I don't think that this is attributed to this person. It just happens to be a quote at the top of the page, like on the blog post. It just sits here, free floating. It's not attributed to anybody. Is my point. And I Googled it and I couldn't see it anywhere. I couldn't find this quote from anything. It's not like a quote from a famous philosopher or book or something like that I could see. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it is. Suspicion is it's him quoting himself. This is something that FDA said. I don't know if that's true. That's a bit weird. If it's not true and it's a quote from somewhere, it's a bit weird not to attribute it. Like, where did this come from? And the quote itself as well, kind of. I mean, there's a very slight kind of hue, like a tinge on the outside, a sort of halo around this paper, which that's a kind of like bitchiness to it. There's some bitchy vibe in the background. There's one way of understanding this is, people don't understand my argument. I've problem convincing people. That's literally 4 words in this sentence. We'll see there's a couple of other bits where it seems that he seems a bit sort of moany in places. And I kind of feel like that's inappropriate in an academic paper. I mean, yeah, on a blog, whatever, you say what you like. But it didn't. Is that an aesthetic choice? Yes, it kind of is. But still, there's some aesthetics that are at play in academic writing, and moaning about people not understanding you or whatever is not. It's not that. And we'll see a couple of other things like that as we go through. It's just, first of all, it's a bit weird. Anyway, Fine. Let's have a. I'm going to read the introduction so that we all know what's going on. Have I set this up enough? He's a Greek Orthodox philosophy bro, presuppositionalist. He's giving his paper here. This is often referred to by Jay Dyer, by I think Jim Bob brought it up in that response he made to me. I've heard a couple of other people. I referred to FDA as the final boss of ortho bro philosophy. I'm not quite sure that's right, but he's like someone that they look to as in some sense a philosophical authority. Anyway, okay. Hopefully that set this all up. I mean, I'll have a look at the chat just to see if there's any. Is there any like anyone need me to say anything in particular about this? I'm just sort of scanning through really. Maybe I don't know. Whatever. Fuck it. Let's not waste any more time. Right. So the introduction to this says this paper provides a philosophical analysis into the necessary conditions for the possibility of knowledge, and explores what could satisfy these conditions so as to provide a sufficient justification criterion for the existence of knowledge. More specifically, I look at two possibilities for grounding and justifying knowledge: theonomous epistemology, which is revelatory theism, and autonomous epistemology, which he says is what the mind could know apart from assuming divine revelation. He goes on, I make a distinction between knowing, first order knowledge, versus claims about knowledge, second order knowledge, to show that establishing that knowledge exists requires justification at the second order. I acknowledge that while it's possible to know something first order without knowing that one knows second order, claims about the existence of knowledge reveal a unique epistemic problem that requires justification at the second order. The consequence of this is that one can never affirm first order knowledge statements without making second order knowledge statements, which results in epistemic bootstrapping and vicious circularity. I argue that these problems specifically arise from autonomous epistemology, and they make grounding and justifying claims that knowledge exists impossible. I show that theonomous epistemology avoids these problems and provides a solution to establishing the necessary conditions for the possibility of knowledge. So that's set it up. He's got a kind of new idea of how he's going to do something that's kind of familiar to people who've looked into presuppositional stuff before. Obviously, we've got some presuppositionalist bingo terms on the table already. He wants to provide the necessary conditions for the possibility of knowledge and sufficient justification criterion, blah, blah, blah. Some of this stuff is standard fare in these circles. Some of it may be a bit more new if you haven't come across this exact sort of species of presup argument before. So this in particular, this kind of key thing that goes on in this paper is this distinction between first order knowledge and second order knowledge. And he thinks that there's a unique epistemic problem that can only be solved if you go, theism, and everyone else is sort of lumbered with this epistemic kind of issue that they can't get out of without sort of rational faux pas like epistemic bootstrapping or vicious circularity. Only the theist, I guess only the orthodox theist, is able to avoid this problem, come out the other side without being trapped or whatever by this problem. So that's a basic, picture of what's going on here. And the way I see it, there's actually kind of two basically completely independent things that happen in the paper. There's this stuff about the first order and second order distinction and what the problem is supposed to be there. And we'll see in a lot more detail, there's an argument that he gives, which is helpful to be able to look at premises and think about the inferences and stuff. And then there's a bunch of other stuff which I think is, as we see, don't want to spoil it too much, but I don't think it's really related to the argument, but that's how he talks. That's what he thinks is the kind of way out of the solution. But there, I think what's going on is where he talks about the theonomous and autonomous epistemology. So in my view, it's not related to the problem that he brings up, but we'll get to that. And so, I'll try and get through all of that stuff as best as I can, and explaining why I think there's a load of problems with this. Like when I posted about this, I said, and I stand by this, I think that there are some holes in this that are so wide, it kind of reminds me of the Scotland defence in the World Cup. You could sort of drive a cart and horses through some of these premises quite easily. So, right, enough of the preamble. So hopefully that's set things up enough. I'm not going to read all of this out because it's not very long. It's 10 pages, but also I'm not, there's no need to actually go through every single line. That does run the risk, of course, that I'm missing something that's completely crucial. And although I've read this paper through a couple of times, and I first read it a few years ago, come back to it and prep for this, there may be something I've missed that's so totally crucial that, completely invalidates my critique. I doubt that, but I think maybe that's right, and I wonder if FDA watches this or responds to it or whatever. That something like that is probably going to happen where he's going to say, "Oh, I misunderstood. I missed the point." Some issue like that, because I didn't read some specific thing he said. But in my view, I have read the whole thing. I mean, I have read the whole thing, and in my view, I'm saying what is important about this paper and what's worth looking at. Because there's a lot of stuff in here that's kind of generic as well, and I'm not going to just go through all of it. So, I mean, effectively, it's got its nice, it's cute kind of title. What's the reason for reason? Right, he wants us to kind of take a step out of the first order, as he talks about, into the second order, and look at the bigger picture and ask what could make this whole thing true. And obviously, presuppositionalist, the whole idea is that you're comparing worldviews, right? And they want to say Christian worldview is the only one, or the Orthodox Christian worldview is the only one that can do stuff that we wanted to do, and all the other worldviews can't do that. So it's always a step, sort of meta step out of the normal perspective of arguments about stuff, and trying to look behind the curtain to see what grounds or justifies or whatever sets up those arguments. For instance, how would we go about establishing the supposed reasons or arguments are in fact acceptable, blah, 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 whatever. He wants to not just use arguments, but kind of ask meta-epistemological questions about those. I'm not particularly familiar if there's any philosophy probably does have a field that's called meta-epistemology. I suppose it's just philosophy of epistemology, philosophizing about epistemology. Does that count? I mean, I guess it just is epistemology. It's probably philosophizing about the philosophy of epistemology. I don't know. It's probably some discipline somewhere somebody's using that term meta-epistemology. He might actually just know more than I do about that. I don't know. So maybe. But he also uses the word metalogic sometimes in this paper. Let's see if I can find one of them. We'll find it later. I just think he's using much more familiar with what metalogic means, and he's not using it in the way that term is traditionally used in academia and philosophy. Doesn't mean you can't use it in your own way, but it doesn't seem right to me the way he's using it. He talks about what is justification. Fine, don't want to spend too much on this. I mean, I'm happy enough to just sort of not have to worry that much about what justification is, and he says we can just assume a general notion of justification, and that will suffice. Fine, cool. Let's not spend ages talking about what justification is as such. Let's hope it doesn't come back that we actually do need to work out what justification is. And it probably is true that we do need to say that later on, but it's nice to not have to worry about that too much at the beginning. He launches into the failure of autonomous epistemology. He tells us that this is failure of autonomous epistemology before he tells us what autonomous epistemology really means. I mean, I guess he did give us a little quick. Autonomous epistemology means something like knowing without presupposing that God exists, something like that. I mean, okay, you kind of get a general idea of it. We're straight into the failure of it. When we consider the existence of knowledge, facts, the validity of logic and arguments and conclusions derived from experience, an important question arises for the reflective inquirer. How does one determine that human reason, unaided by any other powers, can actually accomplish what it sets out to do? That is, know reality and what is true. In other words, within the sphere of human reason alone, can we ever determine whether knowledge exists? So I think it's worth pausing on another thing that annoyed me a little bit about this. And nothing I've said so far has been particularly profound or even significant, but just to clear the ground a little bit. the phrase "knowledge exists" comes up lots in this, and it's like he wants to justify that knowledge exists, that type of thing. He says that a lot. I don't really like the phrase "knowledge exists." I mean, in a sense, okay, yeah, knowledge exists. I know what you mean, but being a bit more precise about it, and philosophically careful about how we say things. So when I debated William Lane Craig recently, one of the things I brought up with him there was this distinction that goes back to Arthur Pryor, where Pryor doesn't like what he calls Pickwickish terminology. So some of you might have seen this in the Kalam debate videos that I did as well. And so the idea is it's something like you might say the beginning to exist of a headache, but the headache's beginning to exist feels like a kind of cumbersome way of talking about it. It's a headaches are not things that begin to exist. Rather, heads are things that sometimes begin to ache. Right. What I've done then is we've kind of rephrased that sentence so that we don't have to kind of reify the headache as something that begins to exist. Because like you might think, well, it doesn't. It's not a thing that begins to exist. It's just my head changes and begins to ache. So my head is non-achy and then aches, right? Nothing begins to exist. It just changes, right? When a banana goes from green to yellow or whatever, it's not like yellow banana begins to exist. It's the same banana that existed. It just changed. So when we're talking about knowledge exists, I think I'd rather say, people have knowledge. People know things. Right, knowledge exists reifies it to an extent that's not necessary. Well, I don't know why we would say knowledge exists rather than somebody knows something. Right, that's to me it just seems like it's a more straightforward, less philosophically highfalutin way of talking about it. So I think every time I read the phrase "knowledge exists" in that type of context in this paper, I'm always translating it in my head to something like somebody knows something. Right, that's what it is. There is knowing happening or something like that, rather than knowledge exists. Right. Because I don't know if you want to press me on it, but I don't think knowledge exists. If we really want, knowledge isn't a thing, right? It's not substance like a beach ball or an apple pie or something. It doesn't really exist. It's something that happens to people. It's states that people can be in. You could come to be in a knowing state of affairs about something, and that's a bit like just when your head starts to ache. Anyway, so with that caveat out of mind. You know what? I could just keep riffing on these tiny little uses of words in there. If you'll indulge me, another one. Since everyone presupposes something, a pre-commitment in using logic, reason, evidence, arguments, etc., there's no one who is presuppositionally neutral when it comes to factual questions and experience. Well, I brought up previously this idea I had about like a dilemma for this worldview analysis type of thing, where on the one hand you might say, well, they want to say everyone's got a worldview, and worldviews answer big philosophical questions like what morality is and what and stuff like that. But in both of those two claims together, each of them on their own might be plausible. Both of them together doesn't sound right. Like, because on the one hand, if I want to make it true that everyone has a worldview, then the simplest way of thinking about it is that a worldview is just all the beliefs you have. It's just everything you think is true. And in that case, obviously, everyone's got a worldview, right? There's no arguing with that. But it doesn't follow that, if that's what we're thinking about, that my worldview has any kind of big answers to any big philosophical questions, or indeed that it's coherent, right? Everyone's worldview is probably to some extent or other incoherent if it's just take all the collection of things you believe, right? You probably believe more than one thing that's in direct contradiction with something else that you think. That's just normal. That's just like knowing stuff and not completely like defragging your brain's hard drive all the time. Sometimes there's mess in there, and so if you want to say that your pre-commitments or your worldview or something is just everything that you believe, then it doesn't do anything like that's necessarily relevant to big things like logic, reason, evidence, arguments, right? It could just be like a bunch of random things that you believe. If you think that's not what a worldview is, right? Like, worldviews have to say something about these types of things, right? Well, how do you know something? What is reality? That type of thing. If you think that's what a worldview is, great. It's just that now not everybody has to have one of those, right? I just think I've met people that don't know anything about epistemology and morality and blah blah blah. It's kind of a philosophical prejudice to think that everybody has a theory like that and other people's are just rubbish and I'm really good at it because I'm a philosopher or something. You're winning at this game that everybody's playing. I mean, some people are just not playing their game. They're not interested. They're doing something else, right? And I just don't believe that everybody has even kind of proto theory about what's going on in these domains of logic, reason, evidence, reality, morality, that type of stuff. So I think, on the one hand, if you want it to be that everyone's got one, you have to admit that it's not a big system of philosophical thought. But if you want it to be a big system of philosophical thought, you've got to let go of the fact that everybody's got one. Anyway, so I think he's trying to have it both ways by saying, everyone presupposes something. Well, I mean, everyone presupposes something in a sense, right? But that doesn't mean everyone presupposes something about using logic, reason, evidence, arguments, morality, reality, blah, blah, blah. Not everybody does presuppose stuff about that, it seems to me. They might, I guess, in some sense, use arguments or, think things are right or wrong and believe that something exists. But you can do that in a non-theoretically grounded way. Like my dog, believes her water bowl exists, right? She wouldn't like it if I punched her in the face, right? But to say that she's got a theory of reality or a theory of ethics just seems to be stretching it beyond belief. Okay, so he then says, consequently, the use of reason, logic, evidence, arguments, use of reason, he's obviously a fan of my blog there, dropping that in without even needing to say it. Consequently, the use of reason, logic, evidence, arguments, etc. is not something proven by experience or reason. It's that by which one proceeds to prove everything else. So even here, kind of want to be like, I don't know. Yeah, kind of. I mean, look, if you want to try and establish something, you've got to keep something fixed in order to, like, the door has to have a fixed hinge on it if it's to open. This kind of like Wittgensteinian idea. It's just, I'm not quite clear that anything has to be the hinge, and I don't know why you couldn't, to sort of push the hinge metaphor a little bit. I'm not sure why I couldn't just sort of move the hinge to the other side of the door and open it the other way round, right? I'm not sure that it has to be that always what I'm doing is presupposing logic and blah, blah, blah. I think that sometimes I can investigate logic as well. And what I'm doing when I'm investigating logic is I'm calling that into question, but keeping other things fixed now in order to have some fixed point in order to investigate the thing in question. So I kind of think, like, I kind of feel like maybe these guys have a very rigid notion of what you have to keep fixed in order to investigate stuff, and that you always presuppose the same things. And I don't know, I don't think I agree with that. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. These two questions arise. What are the necessary preconditions of blah, 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 whatever? Can human reason, when isolated solely within its own space of reason, ever determine whether its processes are legitimate, such that we can know anything at all without blah, 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 blah? So he thinks that, human reason unaided by divine help, basically, can never, determine whether it's doing anything right or not. And so he thinks that's the kind of the epistemic morass that we're going to fall into, according to him. Yeah, right, again, because there's no one that's presuppositions, and since our presuppositions will determine how we see man, the world, knowledge, science, ethics, blah, blah, blah. He says et al. I don't think that's right. I think it means etc. Et al. Is sort of like, you talk about and the others, or whatever, like when you have co-authors or something. Anyway, whatever. Doesn't matter. I'm getting too pedantic. Okay, here's a handy autonomous epistemology. He means any attempt to construct a philosophical account of the world on the assumption that it's possible that God does not exist, or that it's possible for man to possess knowledge and give a coherent and justified account of this knowledge, independent, autonomous from the existence and revelation of God. That is a long and annoyingly disjunctive definition. It's not helpful, right? When you say, oh, by that I mean P. This is P, or Q, and Q is really, really long and sort of involves the same sort of thing as P. Like, what do you mean or, right? Are you telling me, like, if I'm saying, like, by, for blurble bunch, I mean one thing or another thing, like, which one is it, right? It's not helpful to explain a term, to give me like a disjunction of things, because they're not the same. I mean, I would have thought it's something. Why isn't this enough, right? On the assumption that it's possible that God does not exist, why isn't that enough for autonomous epistemology? Does he mean and? That it's possible for man to possess a coherent blah, blah, blah? Or is it like I can pick which one of these I want? And autonomous epistemology is just the kind of disjunction of either of those. It's very strange. It's weird writing. You know, on one hand, this is like well written because you can read it and you go, oh, it sounds kind of like, yeah, well, blah, blah, blah. But the more you stare at it, the more you look at it and go, what? Why is he writing it like that? So this all very unhelpful. It's sort of waffly to do this. And it says, I would classify this as bad writing. And it's the sort of thing I think that authors pick up by reading other people who write like that. And bad diet of reading leads to bad outputs of writing, in my view. I don't like this. If I was marking an essay where a student wrote like this, I would say, yeah, that's not helpful. Don't write it like that. So my best attempt to understand this is there any attempt to construct a philosophical account of the world on the assumption that it's possible that God does not exist. Fine. So that's in that sense then. So I think you can cash out the distinction between theonomous and autonomous epistemology such that they are dichotomous. And this will be one of my bugbears, I think actually most of the time when he's doing it, it doesn't work like that. Because obviously it depends what we mean by, like, what's the negation of this? Any attempt to construct a philosophical account of the world that's not on the assumption that it's possible that God does not exist, or that insists that God does exist. Or, I mean, I don't know. It's painfully unclear sometimes, this distinction. Either one sees human reason as grounded in God's revelation, the precondition for the possibility of any knowledge, theonomous epistemology, or one sees human reason as independent, autonomous. Now, put like that, it's not a dichotomy, right? Either human reason is grounded in God's revelation, or human reason is independent. Well, independent presumably means not grounded in anything, right? It's independent, it stands on its own, autonomous. That's what autonomous and independence mean. But there are third options, right? I mean, human reason could be grounded in something that's not God, right? Then it wouldn't be grounded in God's revelation and it wouldn't be autonomous. So put like this, straightforwardly, it's not dichotomous, right? And yet he definitely wants it to be a dichotomy. And actually, that's a good segue into my first clip that I've got lined up. So I have a clip of him explicitly claiming that it's a
So
dichotomy.
Malpass had this argument that, either it's not a true disjunct, meaning there could be other options. Like, for example, you're eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or a steak. Well, that means a true disjunct. It's not either A or B.
Oh, and I didn't cut that, by the way. The original stream jumps. It has, like, I guess maybe it's some error in the streaming or something, but it cut that. I didn't do that. I'm not hiding something that he says. You can go and look at that yourself if you don't believe me.
Sandwich or a steak. Well, that means a true disjunct. It's not either A or B, but A or not A. And then we'll get into this later. They have their own criticism of that. But I really do want to put it into a true dichotomy within the disjunct. And so it's going to be either autonomous or theonomous. There can't be any third option.
So he's very clear there, right? He doesn't want there to be a third option. He wants it to be A or not A. And let's go back to this paper. He wants it to be A or not A. But this way of setting it up, as I just said, very straightforwardly, this isn't an expression that's equal to A or not A. Either human reason is grounded in God's revelation, or it's not. That would be A or not A. But not grounded in God's revelation is a much broader notion than it being independent. That is not grounded in anything. So that's just logically, that's not a dichotomy. And clear as day, you just heard him say, I want it to be a dichotomy, A or not A. So there's a big problem here. And it's not a very new one. We see this with, like, basically every presuppositionalist that I've ever read, I think, struggles with this. It's like they have to almost doctrinally get to this binary idea that there's only two worldviews, and yet there just isn't. I mean, you know, there is only if you take one of them to be just the negation of the other one, which leaves it wide open. And if you do it like that, then you just have to refute like everything under the sun. Um, and again, the idea here is that if you just were able to mount a successful attack against some specific alternative, if you can dress it up as if it's a dichotomy, then you just win because you've shown that the contrary is impossible. But like we've seen in lots of different ways with pre-sup stuff, this is just another sort of failure to hide the ball. Yeah, like it's obviously not a dichotomy. You know, he's saying that there's much talk about various epistemic theories, worldviews, blah, 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 but however, there are really only two possible epistemic starting points or presuppositions that can be taken. No, that's just not true. Yeah, it's not true. He has this epistemological horse before your metaphysical cart. I think later on this becomes epistemological horse before your it's the missing the epistemological trees for the epistemic forest or something later on. So here is the kind of one of the two sort of arguments, I guess. I think they're just different from each other. So firstly, so he's got this idea where it's something like, look, depending on what the metaphysics is, am I actually showing? Yeah, I'm showing the screen. Depending on what your metaphysics is, that might have implications about what the correct epistemology is, right? So if the world, I don't know, is some way, that would mean that some theory of what knowledge might be like wouldn't be able to obtain. I guess, straightforwardly, if he's saying if God didn't exist, I guess revelational epistemology would be off the table. So you'd only know that you could have revelational epistemology if you knew that God existed, but you could only know that God existed if you had some epistemology, though, explains what does that mean to know. How do I know that God exists and I'm not fooling myself, that type of thing. So he thinks that there's a kind of like, which one comes first, the metaphysics or the epistemology? You kind of have to have one of them first before you have the other one, blah, blah, blah. And though he points out this is quite similar to Chisholm's criterion problem with the criterion. That's actually, I think this goes back to Van Til, and I don't know if he acknowledges that. I don't know whether he doesn't like Van Til because Van Til's Calvinist and he's like a Greek Orthodox, so they disagree theologically speaking, but definitely there is something in Van Til that's almost exactly the same as this, where Van Til's complaining that Kant sort of puts epistemology before metaphysics, and in the medieval times they were putting metaphysics prior to epistemology, and whatever. He wants to disrupt that by, I think basically he wants to prioritize metaphysics really, but he wants to disrupt the kind of seeming tension, whatever. Anyway, it just seems like a very, very, very similar to something that I vaguely remember reading from Van Til. I didn't find a clip of this, but there is a bit in that video where it seems to me that he's saying that this distinction between which comes first out of epistemology and metaphysics is his idea, and it's like different to Chisholm, and it's like a novel idea that he's got. I don't know about that. I think this is not novel, and anyone could think of this. Now, my whole real beef with this issue is all this paragraph here, which I guess comes back later on as well. What comes first out of epistemology and metaphysics? I don't know what type of firstness you mean. I sort of wake up, philosophically speaking, as an adult, as most of us do. You're not reflecting on your epistemology when you're a 5-year-old. I mean, most of us are not. You're kind of an adult by the time you even start thinking about anything like that. And you just already have both a proto-epistemology and proto-metaphysical picture by that point. If you're a philosophically reflective person, you've already started wondering occasionally, how do I know that? What does it mean? Is this guy right? Well, he's saying whatever, and wondering about what the world is actually like. You'll have done that before you've reflected on the deeper questions. You kind of like find yourself in the midst of like a hermeneutic circle that doesn't have a starting point. You update, you change it, you fiddle about with it, blah blah blah. You kind of think, maybe my epistemology needs to be tinkered with, my account of metaphysics, tinker with that a little bit. But it's not like you come with a blank slate and you go, right, day one, right? Let's establish epistemology first, and then think, oh, bugger, I better do metaphysics first. Oh, I can't, I don't know where to go. Like Buridan's ass, not knowing which direction to go in. It's not like that. I mean, I guess he doesn't mean temporal priority anyway. He means something like something else, kind of priority in a more kind of theoretical sense. But then I'm getting a bit lost about like what we're saying and why. Yeah, I guess I just don't know what the sort of priority is there. So this sort of sounds nice as a poetic description of a dilemma that you're in, but I just don't really feel moved by it. Anyway, so and then there's this other thing, which it seems to me is just completely independent. I think it was just useful for just sort of painting a sort of shape of how he's thinking about something. You kind of getting like this thing, but I've got also that thing, and I kind of that thing if I don't have this thing. Right? There's a kind of like basic vibe of the analysis that's going on there, and then that sort of shape gets applied to something, where it gets applied to this sort of first order and second order stuff. But like other than having that kind of general shape, I think these two things are just separate from each other, right? First order and second order stuff. It doesn't seem to me it's metaphysics, right? It's not like first order is epistemology and second order is metaphysics or anything like that. So these two things are just like separate. Um, and okay, and here we get another sort of like glimpse of the underlying bitchiness that might be going on in the background of this paper. He says, I have made an important distinction elsewhere. Firstly, this clause does nothing in the sentence that follows it, right? I mean, just make the distinction. Why are you saying you've made it elsewhere? So what, right? So what is this? An advert for another paper that you've written? It doesn't play any role. Somebody just trying to understand it doesn't matter if you've said something somewhere else. Is it self-advertising? You like go and read my other paper, right? That sort of thing shouldn't be in an academic paper, even if you have done that. Even if you've written another paper somewhere, great. Unless it's like directly relevant. Like, to see more about this here, or to see the background to that, look at this paper or something. Just saying I've also said this other thing somewhere else is irrelevant, it seems to me. And I also find it kind of strange that you're calling it an important distinction. I mean, if it's important, great, but like the fact that you've made it as your distinction and it's important, the combination of those two things just sounds a bit, like, don't say that. It should be kind of cringed out by saying things like that. There is an important distinction between blah, blah, blah. Fine. I've made a distinction. Okay, kind of irrelevant. I've made an important distinction. Just sounds up your own ass. Like, that's not the right. Aesthetic, yes, but kind of makes me feel, why does no one feel like this distinction is important? I've already said this. No one's listening to me. That's what I'm getting. It's the vibe I'm getting. So it doesn't come across well. It sounds whiny. Anyway, between first order knowledge and second order knowledge. Okay, great. So I mean, when I first read this, I was thinking, well, I know what that means. First order knowledge is, somebody knowing something. Second order knowledge, somebody knowing that they know that thing. Right? Anybody mentions it down here. It's kind of KK thesis. So knowing and knowing that you know, that type of thing. But my first sort of overriding complaint with this paper is that this distinction, the first order and second order, is just hopelessly confused, and it's not quite what I was anticipating it was going to be, right? So he does explain it, like, e.g., first order knowledge, e.g., S knows that P, and second order knowledge, e.g., S asserts that he knows that P, and then there's a semicolon. This is a bit like the or I was complaining about before. This is another example. S knows that he knows that P. So these two are just different things. S asserts that he knows that P, and S knows that he knows that P. So each of them is kind of related to the original S knows that P, but in different ways, and they have different properties to them. So it's not clear exactly what do you mean by second order knowledge, right? You're not helping me by saying, oh, second order knowledge means this or that, right? Like, which one? If there's some kind of more general thing that both of those two instantiate, so that saying each of them sort of instantiates the more abstract third thing that they both instantiate, just say the third thing. It's a philosophy paper. You don't need to be shy about making the distinction. So it's an unclear way of distinguishing these two things. It's distinction is drawn. Distinction, the philosopher's favorite thing to do is to distinguish stuff, and he's doing it in an unclear way. And then bitchiness ometer is like twitching again, because it's often overlooked, often misunderstood or overlooked. But he's saying it's his distinction that he's made. It's important, but it's misunderstood and overlooked. It's just like kind of saying, well, what are you saying? You're saying that you're good, you've said something important, and everyone else is schmucks who can't follow it, don't understand it. That's very arrogant and whiny. And, just like, don't put that in a philosophy paper. No one cares that you feel annoyed that people aren't reading your paper. Keep that out of the philosophy. This is probably why they're not reading it, if that indeed is what's going on in the background. So I would just take out the personal stuff when you're writing a philosophy paper. There's no business being in there. Okay, in inquiring into what possible justifications would serve to ground knowledge and our claims that knowledge exists, again, I don't like that phrase, but whatever, we're asking a second-order question about knowledge and justification that's distinguished from first-order statements, regardless of whether their first and second-order content is the same. Furthermore, these distinctions are not to be confused with the familiar issues in epistemology concerning what's called the KK thesis. So that's, if you know something, does it entail that you know it? In pointing this out, we avoid the whole debates between internalism and externalism. We can grant that it's possible that a person S knows that P, and that if they know that P, then it's also possible for S to have a second order knowledge that they know. So he's granting the KK principle for some reason, that at least that it's possible. I guess, for argument's sake or something, let's grant that. In other words, we acknowledge that first-order knowledge is not contingent upon second-order knowledge, but rather the other way around. Okay. However, our question and concern are not about knowing in particular propositions, but about knowledge in general and how it's possible to ground and justify the existence of knowledge. Now, which is a second-order issue. Now, I do think, at the beginning we said we don't need to talk about justification. Whatever justification means, that's fine. But I do think that at some point we're going to have to, confront this, because what are you saying, right? It's not, he's saying it's not the knowing particular propositions, like knowing the P or something. It's about knowledge in general. Okay, but you want to justify the existence of knowledge. But justification is a term that's used in epistemology. It's what is knowledge? Knowledge is something like a justified true belief, right? So what does it mean? What gets justified are beliefs. A justified belief that's true is knowledge. So what does it mean to justify knowledge, right? I mean, presumably I'm going to have to, at some point, when answering that question, explain what I mean by justification. And that's going to be still taking a stand on exactly the question he said was it doesn't matter. So it sort of seems a bit weird to ask this question at all, but also to say that you don't need to talk about what justification is, but actually justification seems to be very, very much central to what he's stressing is, it's not this humdrum question, it's this important deep question, which involves this notion, he said, it doesn't matter, spelling out what it means, which is kind of confusing. Okay, and then key idea here, any assertions about the existence of knowledge at the first order will inevitably be a second order statement that necessitates knowledge exists at the first order. Therefore, our second order statements about knowledge can only be justified if we first provide justification for the existence of knowledge in general at the first order. However, we have a serious and insurmountable problem. Okay, and then we're going to get in this argument, which I'm going to spend basically the whole rest of the time talking about this argument here. But I do want to move over to some slides. I prepared a couple of little slides. And actually, let's also hear him speak in his own words about this distinction. So a little clip.
Likewise, with the first and second order, I have what? 2 categories. With the first order, John knows the dog's brown, right? And then our claims that John knows that the dog is brown, or that knowledge exists. Now, clearly, I couldn't make the second order claim unless the first order were true. But what's the problem? I'm always making second order claims about the first. So it's, well, yeah, obviously I've got to provide justification. So what? Grant me all my assumptions, i.e., about first order, So that I can make all my statements about my second order, that John knows knowledge exists. Basically, everything everybody would ever put in a chat, all the objections that we're getting are all second order. They're all making epistemic claims, which is different than a person being in the state of knowledge, is very different than somebody actually making claims. So again, we have this kind of tension between two categories. I can't get number two without number one, but I'm always in number two. So I assume and bootstrap, unjustifiably so, category one to arbitrarily and unjustifiably.
Oh, that stopped mid-sentence, but a couple of words after that. Yeah, so there he's spelling out the kind of general problem, which is that something like, in order to have first order statements, you have to have second order statements. Second order statements depend on first order statements, but you can't really ever say a first order statement because you're always stuck in the second order, something like that. I mean, I'm finding it hard to sort of paraphrase it coherently because of the issues I've drawn, like made myself think are present in the argument. So let me share my screen and we can have a look at what I'm chatting about here. So look, remember, first time we came across this distinction, he said, look, first order, and an example he gave was S knows that P, right? And in second order, he gave two different things. First one was that S asserts that he knows that P, and the second one was S knows that he knows that P, right? And annoyingly, those are not the same thing, right? Exactly what the relationship is supposed to be. This one, its relation to this one, S knows that P, its relation to S knows that he knows that P. Well, it's easy, right? It makes sense that we've got the embedded proposition, he knows that P, and what's sort of flanking it is that he knows that, right? So he's just sort of iterating the knows that predicate or operator here. So it's just like nesting two knows that's, and then P is the content. So it relates to the first one because it's just, the first example here, S knows that P, well, it's got one knowledge operator in it. Second one down here, S knows that he knows that P. The difference is the second one is exactly the same as the first one. It's just got two knows operators rather than one. So to me, that makes much more sense to call it second order knowledge. Right? It's knowing that you know that. Great. Okay, got it. But why is this one also second order then? S asserts that he knows that P. I mean, on its face, it's very different, right? An assertion isn't knowing. Assertion is a linguistic act that you would do. Knowing is like a kind of belief. It's something about your belief, believing in the right way. So they're not the same thing. And why is it that like S asserting something means that it's second order, right? Are all assertions second order then? Anyone assert, if we ever say S asserts that anything, that just means it's second order. I don't really get it. So at least I can sort of maybe think my way into going, okay, I guess that's second order because at least it's the proposition P again, or the proposition he knows that P is at least put into the context of another operator. So maybe we call it like A and then open brackets K, open brackets P, close brackets, right? There's two operators and they're nesting with the P in the middle, something like that. I mean, I guess it's second order in that sense. But it's just, these just seem like different to me. And the fact that he just gives you both of them as if like they both are examples of what he means by second order isn't very helpful. But let's continue with the other things. From that interview with Jay Dyer, he also says, John knows that the dog is brown is an example of first order. Now that's absolutely fine. That fits with the pattern up here. S knows that P, fine. And then for second order, he says, our claims that John knows that the dog's brown. And I guess it's kind of similar to this first one. S asserts that he knows that P, because we're not talking about like iterating knowledge operators. We're talking about like a claim that has some knowledge, somebody knowing something as its propositional content. Like, okay, so broadly speaking, that's like in line with the first of these two seemingly distinct examples for what second order means. But then Jay goes on, in fact, I've got a clip to play here. Well, Jay goes on to say something just seems to be different, right? He says an example of the first order, the tree is green. And an example of second order is that Bob knows that the tree is green. But if we look at it, Bob knows that the tree is green fits the schema that he's put for first order. But for some reason, Jay's thinking that that's second order, right? And for the first order, he just gives a proposition. The tree is green. I've put it in quote marks because Jay put it in quote marks. So I'm going to go back to Riverside a second, stop sharing this, and in fact play this this clip. It's only 7 seconds long. Let's just play this.
Look at this on a diagram, and this illustrates what you're talking about. The tree is green. Bob knows the tree is green. First order, second order.
Right. I mean, I cut it off there because they then sort of deviate a little bit. But the point is, and you verify this for yourself if you think I'm making this up, but FDA doesn't go, no, that's wrong. First order is S has the schema, S knows the P, right? That's first order. You've put first order is just P, right? Second order isn't just S knows the P, that's first order. It's S knows that he knows the P, or S asserts that he knows the P. So what I'm getting from that is that Jay doesn't understand the distinction, at least the same way that FDA drew it in the paper and said it out loud on that stream. Jay's getting confused because it's intrinsically unclear. And the FDA doesn't correct him. So he doesn't even see that Jay's doing it differently. I mean, I guess it's a live stream. Maybe he didn't notice that it was wrong or whatever, but he doesn't correct him. He doesn't seem to the FDA in the moment there that Jay was getting it wrong. But when you just look at the words that he's writing on the paper, for us unlucky people who have to kind of take his words and try and understand what he means, it just is. Jay did get it wrong. He did it. He said something different to what FDA said, and FDA doesn't correct him. And now, unfortunately, there's another instance of this in the same stream where FDA goes back and he says again that example of the first order is knowledge exists. Which I guess could be, I was saying knowledge exists means something like somebody knows something. So maybe that's not so bad. It kind of broadly speaking means the same thing as he's put. There's a schema for first order there. Okay. I mean, it's different from what Jay put, but whatever. But then he contrasts it. Second order is the statement that knowledge exists, or the statement. And he's put, confusingly, quote marks around knowledge exists. I think actually in the paper, or wherever I got this from, yeah, I guess this comes from the paper. Sorry, not in the conversation with Jay. This last one. He contrasts knowledge exists, and he puts that in quote marks with the statement, and then still in quote marks, but also with single quotes. So it kind of looks like there's 3 quote marks there. But the statement knowledge exists. I'm uber pedantic, but he's put the full stop there in between the single and double quotes, which doesn't really make any sense. But right now, it just seems like, what's the difference here? It's just this is a proposition and this is a statement. And that's the distinction that we're drawing. So first order is just propositions and second order is just statements, right? That is a linguistic utterance that contains or expresses a proposition. I mean, if that's the distinction between first order and second order, it's not an epistemological thing. It's not first order knowledge and second order knowledge. It's just propositions and statements, right? And that's just clearly not the same thing as the difference between knowing that P and knowing that you know that P, or knowing that P and which is, S knows that P, this is something that's truth apt, that could be true. And S asserts that he knows that P, that's also something that's truth apt. But, the difference between a proposition and a statement doesn't really work like that, right? Like, I mean, you could have a statement that's not truth apt. Just quote anything and it becomes a statement. Anyway, so like, I'm sorry, but this is confusing at the least. Right? What exactly the distinction is a crucial distinction for the paper. It's the basis on which he drives this epistemic issue for the autonomous epistemology. And it's completely unclear. Like, I'm trying to figure this out and I can't. Why? It's because he points in 2 directions at once, right? It's like I asked him, hey, FDA, where's the shop? And he's gone this way and pointed in 2 directions at the same time. That's not helping me, right? Even if one of them points in the right direction, you're pointing in 2 different directions at the same time. Don't do that, right? Why are you doing that? So I want to come back to, well, actually, let's come back to the paper. because I want to now look at the argument. Actually, no, do you know what? I've written it out in the slides, and it'll probably be easier to just look at it there. I mean, I appreciate probably people are listening rather than watching, or possibly gently falling asleep, and they don't want to be like holding their phone up to look at it. But look, this is the argument. I briefly showed it in the paper. I've copy and pasted it exactly because in the paper and on the blog post version of it, it's also copy and pasted exactly. And what that means is, annoyingly, it has these kind of little grammatical issues again. And it's just like, everyone, when they write a blog post, I've always done this. I write a blog post, think it's perfectly fine, read it a couple of times, publish it, and then someone messages me and gone, you've spelt this wrong, or, well, you've put the wrong word here, whatever. It happens. But then, you go and check it and you'd fix it. And after a while, you catch them. And it's weird to me that like the academia published Word document version of this and the kind of HTML version on his blog both have the same punctuation issue here. Well, what am I talking about? It's that on the one hand here you've got single quote marks, on the other side here you've got a double quote marks. That's just not punctuation. And the other thing is that the subject of the sentence is beliefs and statements. That makes it plural, but the copula is singular because it's is. It doesn't sound right when you read it out. Right? If it's true that knowledge exists, first order, then our beliefs / statements that knowledge exists is also true. Right? It doesn't work with is. And the strange thing is that in the long video where he's just going through it on his own, he reads it out and speaks it out loud like that as well. And as far as I know, I mean, maybe this is unfair, but as far as I know, FDA is an English speaker, native English speaker. So it should sound wrong to say a sentence where the subject is plural, but you're using a singular is, like the copula is for a singular statement. Anyway, you're better than this, bro. You can do better than this. Clean it up so that it's at least grammatically straightforwardly, clear and clean. That's easy. You can definitely do that. Anyway, so that's first premise. If it's true that knowledge exists, then our beliefs or statements that knowledge exists is also true. Premise 2, the first order must be affirmed if we are to affirm the second order. Premise 3, however, any affirmation or statement about the first order is a second order statement. 4, therefore, one can never affirm the first order statement because one is always making second order statements. 5, therefore, autonomous man cannot establish if knowledge exists. Okay, so there is a lot to complain about with this argument. This is, I guess, where I'm going to start sort of being less pedantic and more just kind of like annoyed about philosophy stuff. I suppose, knowledge exists first order up here in this first. Just think about the first premise. If it's true that knowledge exists, open brackets, first order, then our belief statements that knowledge exists is also true. So presumably, it doesn't say open brackets second order down here, but I assume that's what he means. So now it's the understanding that the first order, second order distinction is just between a proposition and a statement, right? That's what that operator does. If I say, Mary believes that the sky is blue or something, it's just to say that the sky is blue is the propositional content of her belief. That's what she believes. So actually, also to be pedantic still, you don't need to put it in quote marks. Either use the that operator to then just name a proposition or mention a proposition, or wrap it in quote marks so that it's clear. And then you don't need that. Putting that in the quote marks is very confusing because it's autism brain is like kicking in. What do you mean that you're quoting it? So you're trying to make it identify the limits of the propositional content is within the limits of the quotation marks, but also the that operator is nested within it. So what am I saying, that the propositional content that the quote marks is giving me is a nested thing? No, that's not what you mean. But you just pick one, don't use both. Right, that knowledge exists is fine. You don't need quote marks for that, or drop that and use quote marks instead. Either of those picks out the proposition. Both of them together is incoherent. Having different quote marks on there is just annoying. But premise 1 is probably reasonably to be regarded as true, it seems to me, because if that's all it's saying, that, this is a proposition, this is a statement, refers to that proposition, then what we're talking about really is just the T schema, basically. We're just saying P if and only if it's true that P. Great. Well, that's fine. In that case, premise 1 is true just because it's an instance of the T schema, in which case, okay, great. Even if you don't, whatever your views are on the T schema, you, generally speaking, it encapsulates something that's basically right. And to the extent anyone's sort of vaguely sympathetic with that, you can nod along to this first premise and just go, okay, great. So if it's true that P, then it's true that P, right? Okay, got it. Is that the T schema? Is it the disquotational schema? Whatever. Either of those, something like that. There's going to be some sort of broadly plausible looking schema that would make that seem like it's just an instance of it. So I'm sort of okay with that, but it does mean that what we're doing is understanding the first order, second order distinction in a way that neither of them is knowledge. I mean, okay, the first order is a proposition that is about knowledge, but it's a proposition, right? It's the sort of thing that the belief might be aimed at, but it's not itself a type of knowledge. The distinction is between proposition and a statement. So neither of them, it's not a distinction between first order knowledge and second order knowledge. It's just a distinction between a proposition and a statement, like the propositional content and a thing that expresses that propositional content, right? Is the second one second order? I mean, I guess you could say that, but it's just, neither of them is knowledge in that sense. They're just, it's just using the word knowledge to mean something completely unrelated if you insist that this is a distinction between types of knowledge. So this is kind of the downfall of this reading of the first order, second order distinction, is that he's very clear over and over again that this is supposed to be an epistemic distinction. It's about types of knowledge. But if it just reduces to the proposition statement distinction, then it's not an epistemic distinction. It's not about types of knowledge. So though he says this sometimes, it's inconsistent with other things that he says. And I don't think that there is a completely coherent way of reconciling all of the things he says. I think he has to pick a lane and stick to it. And not doing so is like not rigorous, basically, and makes it difficult to understand what he's saying, which goes right back to the beginning where he was moaning in his quote at the beginning, which is presumably him quoting himself, saying the hardest thing is to get people to understand it. But, you don't help if you are systematically unclear about the key distinction in your paper. It's your fault. That's on you. Don't blame everyone else because you clearly wobble about between two different or three or four different understandings of what this key distinction is supposed to be. And that's your fault. You should clean that up. And I'm being bitchy about it because, the guy's got a PhD in philosophy. So this drawing a distinction and using it in an argument should be bread and butter. That's what it is. That's what philosophy is. Anyway, so the premise... so premise 2, still on premise 1 then. Premise 2, the first order must be affirmed if we're to affirm the second order. Well, what does it mean to affirm, right? What are we saying here? Is it to make us an assertion? I mean, am I supposed to understand it as being, I'm standing up and saying S knows that P? Is that what it means to affirm something, or does it mean something more like being committed to it? Like as in sort of thing where I'm not saying it out loud, but because of the other things I'm saying or doing, I'm clearly committed to it. Is that what it means to affirm it? It's not clear to me. Hold on. I'm sort of tempted to think that the use of the word affirmed in this context is partly because FDA's got a sort of theological background, and affirmations are things that you do towards theological doctrines, I think, rather than, you can affirm the whatever sunrise every day like a hippie or something, but I think that there's this thing about like affirming the second council of blah blah blah's conclusions about the nature of Jesus or something. It means something like publicly stating that you accept it and you're in this club of people who also accept it. It's a kind of affirmation in that sense. I guess it also just carries this idea of it just being like kind of to affirm something. You can just like ask somebody a question and they affirm it. It kind of means something similar to confirm in that sense. You're just saying, yes, that's right, whatever. And then I guess in that sense, it's kind of close to just being an assertion, right? But look, okay, let's understand this, try and understand it as an assertion, right? So the first order, that's things like propositions, knowledge exists, must be affirmed if we are to affirm the second order. So I think what he's trying to say is that, like, if I make the statement knowledge exists, then I must, say another statement, something about the first order. But that doesn't seem right. I mean, I can make a statement without making another one. Well, I don't have to. I'll just say one statement if I want. Thank you very much. I don't have to say another one as well. So it can't mean, affirmation here can't mean actually making a statement. Because if it does, it's just not true for any two statements. If I say one of them, I have to say the other one. So that can't be what must be affirmed. What else is that supposed to mean? So I don't think it could mean assertion like this, affirmation, or anything really like that, because if I make a solemn kind of affirmation in a kind of theological context, I don't have to make another one. So there's never any context where I have to make more than one assertion. I don't have to make any. If I make one, I don't have to make a second one, no matter what they are. So it must mean something more like being committed to, right? Like if I say something, then I'm committed to some other thing. And here it kind of like, I could understand it if what we were talking about between the distinction between first order and second order is like knowing that you know that P is second order and knowing that P is first order. So like so for instance, imagine this, imagine I affirm the second order. So I say, I know that P. Well, because knowledge has got a truth condition built into it, if it's true that I know that P, it follows logically, given that definition of the truth condition in knowledge, that I know, the proposition that I'm nesting. If I know that P, then it must be true. In fact, it follows logically and entails that I know that P. I can't know that I know that P. It can't be that I know that P is true, but it's not true that I know that P. So there's a kind of logical relation between them, which could be expressed much more straightforwardly by just saying something like second order knowledge, knowing that you know that P, entails that you know that P. Right? Now we're not talking about must be affirmed or something, we're just talking about this entailment relation, which is what that is on this reading. Well, then it's plausible, right? But if that was right, if there's the sort of plausible way of reading this sentence, kind of just incompatible with the proposition statement understanding of what the first order, second order distinction is, right? I mean, I can assert that, the sky is pink, right? I can say the sentence, I can express the proposition that the sky is pink, but it doesn't mean that it is, right? It doesn't even mean that I'm committed to it being true. I can make an assertion. I guess I believe that if it's an assertion as such, then I guess I believe that it's true, but it doesn't mean that it is true, right? That's basically the difference. So like I think I have a slide down here actually. So yeah, think about it like this. S knows that he knows that P, if and only if, right? This is standard stuff. S believes that P, S has good reasons for the belief, like it's justified, and P is true. It's justified true belief account of what knowledge means. So in that sense, then, because if you know that P, because of this third condition, it just means that P is true, right? If it's true that I know that P, then it's true that P. On the other hand, assertion is different, right? Assertion is different accounts of what assertion means. Obviously, there's different accounts of what knowledge is, but there's different accounts of what assertion is as well. But like generally speaking, it means something like the following: S asserts that he knows that P, or S asserts that P, if and only if S makes a linguistic act that expresses P. So you could say something, you could move your lips and blah blah blah, make a sound that expresses P. I guess you could make an assertion by typing something into a computer, or a phone or something. So a linguistic act thought about generally, you do something, right? To assert something means that you've done some linguistic act that expresses the proposition. But an assertion carries with it something additional to just saying a sentence. It also means something like that you believe it and that you want other people to take it as being true. So I think, read different people in philosophy of language and like norms of assertion, you'll find different accounts of that. And I know Timothy Williamson has a different view where assertion and whatever is more like knowledge. But whatever, most people, most philosophers of language, when talking about assertions, think of it as something like that. So it's like the sort of thing that you would do if you were giving evidence in a court, in a trial, right? If you're called on as an expert witness or something, they ask you questions about, like, is this how blood splatter normally works or something? And you're the expert witness, and you're expected in that context to be making assertions. And that is, you will say things back that express propositions, and that those propositions will be ones that you believe, right? That's why you take the oath at the beginning to say that everything you say will be the truth. And also that it's propositions that you want other people to come to also take as true, right? So that you're not like being ironic or making a joke or something. You're just straightforwardly saying things that you think are true with and hoping that other people think of them as being true. That's what it is to make an assertion, right? So an assertion isn't the same. Like technically on this view, like if you're lying, that's not making an assertion, because you're not really, you're saying something, but you don't believe it to be true. You believe the negation of it to be true, right? If it's a lie. And you might want people to come to believe P, but you actually believe not P, right? That's basically what a lie is. So it's like a kind of deviation of an assertion, whereas an assertion is just like a basic kind of model, that's kind of core speech act, where you're saying something seriously and things that you take to be true. But they don't have to be true, right? If you can assert something that's false. So I could solemnly assert that blood splatter works like this, give my evidence in court, be truthful in the sense that I'm honest, but also be saying something that's false. So it just doesn't, it doesn't have this truth condition built into it. It has that I believe that it's true, but it doesn't have that it actually is true. And what that means is, going back to this here, it sort of disrupts this idea that, like, okay, I could affirm the second order, I can make a statement, and that doesn't mean that the statement is true, that the first order is affirmed. I'm not actually, it doesn't entail it in the same way that the knowledge principle does. So, on both readings of this, right, if I try and read affirmation as an assertion in this sense, like I just don't have to say second order, I don't have to say a first order. It's false that the first order must be affirmed if I'm to affirm the second order. I can just say anything I like, and I don't have to say another one. And if you think about it in terms of like what my assertion commits me to, I think it's also false, because like I can just say second order, I could just assert that P, and it doesn't mean that P is actually true, right? So I'm not really dragged from the second order into the first one, like on either of those readings. And like I don't know what he means. So this is just a new ambiguity. Like, what do you mean by affirmation here? And like, how is this second order being dragged to the first order thing supposed to work? I don't know. And I'm trying to understand. I'm not just trying to be a dick about it. I just think, this is not helpful. Anyway, premise 3, however, any affirmation or statement about the first order is a second order statement. I mean, this is kind of almost trivial, because if we're understanding this first order, second order distinction as the difference between a proposition and a statement, then obviously any statement is a second order statement, because any statement is a second order statement. All that it is to be a second, the second order is just statements. The distinction between first and second order is just first order is propositions, second order is a statement. So like, obviously any second order, any affirmation or statement about anything is a second order statement in virtue of it being a statement, right? So it's like, it sort of works if it's, on this reading that he's being kind of committing to here, but only in a sort of weirdly trivial way, right? Like, there's something interesting about like epistemology or anything that's going on. It's just like, if I make a statement, then it's a second order statement. What does a second order statement mean? It just means it's a statement. Like, and there's nothing interesting happening here. And then premise 4, therefore, one can never affirm the first order statement, because one is always making second order statements. I mean, yeah, right, you can't affirm a first order statement without it being a second order statement, because first order statement doesn't even make sense. First order, the distinction between first order and second order is that first order is propositions, right? So there is no first order statement. Right? Statement is a thing that expresses a proposition. Right? Second order expresses the first order on this. So it doesn't make sense to say first order statement. Like, what do you mean? If, what's the first order statement? It would be that knowledge exists. And that's the thing he's just saying up here is the second order. So what are you talking about? I mean, yeah, it's mind-boggling. It's like a maze that there's just no way out of because he didn't cut the hedge correctly. You're just always walking around with no way out of this maze. It's not because it's an epistemological dilemma. It's just because nothing's happening in this argument. And then the most egregious part of this, the worst, most insanely egregious thing, therefore, autonomous man cannot establish if knowledge exists. Now, whoa. Where did autonomous man come from? Autonomous man is a phrase, a term that does not feature in any of these premises, right? This has got nothing to do with autonomous man. This is just distinction between propositions and statements, right? Then there's claim that if you make a statement, then you're committed to the proposition it expresses. Statements about the first order are statements. Therefore, no proposition is a statement because statements are statements. That's what this argument says. And then it goes, but therefore, autonomous man cannot establish if knowledge exists. Okay, autonomous man doesn't feature in the premises. It's obviously going to be invalid, right? You don't have to be a logician to understand this basic thought, which is that logic doesn't ever get you out anything you don't put in, right? You can't derive something about autonomous man from a series of premises that has no mention of autonomous man in it. And I'm not just being uncharitable. There's no obvious synonym for anything like autonomous man here. This isn't like if autonomous epistemology is true, then blah, 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 right? Why think that this is only, this premise one was just something about like the T schema, right? If P, then it's true that P. That's not just true for autonomous epistemology, right? Is it? Is there something about theonomous epistemology that disagrees with the T schema, right? Well, what's going on? It's got nothing to do with that. So this glaringly, blatantly, massively obvious non sequitur. The premises have nothing to do with the conclusion, right? And obviously so, right? And the funny thing about this is that he gives this nice anecdote about how this argument came to him in a dream. And, I'm not shitting on that. That's fine. Get your inspiration however you want to. But he says that he talked to Jay Dyer about it. PhD philosopher FDA talked to layperson Jay Dyer about it to get to check if it was a good argument. And you see in both of those videos he gives this story about how he had the dream, he phones afterwards, takes him a day to remember it completely or something like that. He writes it down and then he checks it with his friends to see if they think it's good or not. Sort of thing I would do, definitely. But he checked it with Jay Dyer and I guess other people and whoever, bro, you need to get better people to check your arguments with because Jay Dyer didn't notice that this is a blatant non sequitur. Seemingly nobody did who you've talked to about this. Nobody noticed that the conclusion couldn't possibly follow logically from the premises because it contains a term that doesn't feature in any of the premises and is not plausible synonym for anything that does appear in the premises. Like a basic understanding of logic. I don't want to be too patronizing about it, but because he's got a PhD, right, in philosophy, apparently, a master's degree and a PhD in philosophy, I expect that he's done some kind of logic. And, especially if you're going to write it out in an argument like this, it exposes gaps in inferential reasoning like this. You're putting it out there for people to look at, so they're going to see it. So I'm surprised if he's had this sort of peer reviewed by his friends or whatever, that he needs to start asking people who have a better knowledge of philosophy. And another thing is that it shows you that Jay Dyer can't spot a valid argument from a glaringly, obviously invalid one, and whoever else as well. So it's very disappointing, this argument. It's complete non sequitur, and it's a complete mess, right? It's a mess because of the fundamental ambiguity intrinsic to the first order, second order distinction. The way it seems to be cashed out here is something to do with propositions and statements about propositions, and when read like that, this goes absolutely nowhere. It's got nothing to do with autonomous man. It's got nothing to do with autonomous versus theonomous epistemology. There's no reason to, if there is a problem about this, which I don't think there is a problem for epistemology in here. I don't really think these premises have got anything to do with epistemology at all, if we're reading it in terms of proposition statement distinction. But if there was a problem, to the extent that there's a problem for autonomous epistemology, it's obviously going to be the same for theonomous epistemology. I mean, if God exists and God reveals truths to me however he wants to, presumably the proposition that knowledge exists entails the statement knowledge exists is true, right? Why would that not be true on theonomous epistemology? What's it got to do with God existing? What's it got to do with revelational epistemology? Absolutely nothing. So there's no reason to think that it's going to be just true on revelational epistemology, but not true on autonomous, right? So it's just sort of hopeless. Like, how did he think this follows from that? I don't know. All right, so I think the last thing I want to just go through is, just because it's, and this is kind of like the that was the kind of main course, and then for a nice nice pudding, we can go and have a look at his. So remember, I played a clip earlier where he insisted that what he wanted was a true dichotomy, right? So let's go back to the paper again. I think it's in this version as well. I imagine it is. It looks like a copy paste from, yeah. So there's a bit of logic going on here. So this is a footnote. He gives an argument like this. If knowledge exists, then God exists. Premise 2, knowledge exists, therefore God exists. So this is modus ponens. Cool. I mean, we've seen this as kind of like Eli Ayala's version. This is exactly that argument, I think. And it says this can be translated into the modal argument form. If necessarily the possibility of knowledge, then necessarily God. Necessarily the possibility of knowledge, therefore necessarily God exists. I mean, fine. It is, in a sense, this is exemplifying modus ponens as well. It's just, it's not a translation. I mean, the second argument has additional features in it, right? Necessarily, possibly Y, and necessarily X. They're not a translation. It's a strengthening of the premises, clearly. I guess the inferential pattern is the same, but it's not a direct translation. Anyway, whatever. I don't want to spend too much on that. What I was interested in was down here. Since one can question whether the existence of God, Y, is in fact a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge and experience, as opposed to something else that would satisfy the necessary condition, the possibility of knowledge, we can form the second argument, a disjunctive syllogism. So disjunctive syllogism is different to modus ponens, right? It's not the same. It's not like you don't, just very obscurely but pertinent, I suppose, is that like in a paraconsistent logic, where you don't have explosion and you have, or like it's a full-on dialethic logic where you have true contradictions, but you don't have trivial system, like in Priest's LP system, you actually don't have disjunctive syllogism, but you do have modus ponens. Right? So they're sort of like independent from each other in a sort of somewhat surprisingly strong way. But anyway, point here is just that like they're not the same. Anyway, this is a different argument. A or not A. Premise 2, not A, therefore A. Now, OGs who've been following my YouTube career for a long time will know that basically the first thing I ever did on YouTube was talk to Matt Slick, and he had basically this argument, and I explained to him for about 4 hours why what the problem was with this, and I call it the Matt Slick fallacy. And I think that in the clip that I turned into a short where FDA was complaining about malpasses asses that were making these pseudo-intellectual arguments that they get from me, I think that's what was going on, is that someone had heard him say this and they'd gone, wait, isn't that the Matt Slick fallacy? And it absolutely is, right? So either God is a necessary condition or not God is a necessary condition. right? Okay, so first premise is just, an instance of the law of excluded middle. It's a tautology. Cool. The second premise, not A, and then the third premise, A. If you think about this, not A already entails A by double negation elimination, right? Not, it just cancels out. So not A is logically equivalent to A. So you don't need the first premise for this argument to work. It's not really a disjunctive syllogism. It's just double negation elimination with a tautology at the beginning that doesn't do anything, right? It doesn't matter. And so in a sense, like, the first premise is irrelevant in this argument. So who cares about that? You could just say not A, therefore A. Great. And it's valid. I'm not saying it's not a valid argument. But the problem with this type of argument is, kind of rhetorically speaking, have you got reason for thinking this premise, not A? If you've got a reason for thinking that, then because it's logically equivalent to A, you've just got a reason for thinking that A is true, right? Why not just skip the double negation elimination and just say, hey, here's a reason for thinking A is true, and then give whatever you said as the reason for thinking that not A is true, right? They're going to be the same, because in this context, not A is substitutable with A, and it would preserve truth. So if it's true that whatever the thing is you've got in mind that makes you think that not A is the case, right? If there's some supporting reason you've got there, then by definition it's bound to fit to supporting just A on its own, right? So it's just, premise one doesn't play any role in the argument. Premise two, if there's anything that makes you think that premise two is true, it just is support on its own for the conclusion. And in a sense, then, that makes it kind of trivial, because who cares about the inference from not A to A? I'll give you that all day, but I'm only going to accept either the premise or the conclusion if you give me some reason to. If you give me a reason to think that the premise is true, you've thereby given me a reason to think that the conclusion is true. So it's just pointless. It's just a waste of time, this argument. And you get to it because you think, well, I want to use this argument form. It looks nice. I like it. But the problem is, if I say A or B, not B, therefore A, right? A or B, someone could say, well, what about C? And as we heard him moan in that little clip, he doesn't want to have to rule out C and D and E. He wants it to be, there's just two options, right? Like if we scroll back up again, he wanted it to be that there is, where did he say it? Just only two possible epistemic starting points that can be taken. And he likes this guy, Russ Mannion, who basically says the same thing. I think he has a quote somewhere around here where he quotes Mannion. As it's meaningless to interpret the world as accidental. This is Mannion. Then the only meaningful way to interpret the world is as intentional, right? As if intentional and accidental are the only two options. There are at bottom only two ways to view the world. It's theistic or meaningless. Christians choose theistic. There really isn't any other choice. And this is just another bulldozing or straitjacketing your mind to think that there's only two options when there are, in fact, more than two. And that's what's going on here, is you get sucked in by people like Mannion or Banson. I think Mannion's actually in the Van Tillian tradition. I don't think he's an Orthodox. I think he's a Calvinist. But you get sucked in by these people into trying to say, no, God damn it, there's only two options, right? Therefore, I can significantly reduce the task ahead of me. To show that A is true, I just need to show that not A is not true. It's just that now, when you're introducing the disjunctive syllogism way of reasoning, now just sort of evaporates, right? It doesn't really do anything. It's not rhetorically meaningful. Logically speaking, it's as thin as it could possibly be. We don't actually need the first premise, and the inference from what's left of the second premise to the conclusion is like the simplest possible inferential rule. So rhetorically speaking, it does absolutely nothing. So this is sort of like bad baby logic. Again, the sort of thing I would expect a PhD philosophy guy to do a much better argument than this. I can understand Matt Slick doesn't really know anything about logic or philosophy. He has, he has a master's in theology. Fine, whatever. And he got it in a place that does presup, like the place that Van Til founded. So fine, obviously he's going to be swept up in that way of thinking. I just think like if you're just studying philosophy and not theology, you should have learnt like inferential patterns like this more independently and wouldn't get sucked in quite so easily. So anyway, I thought this was fun. That was the fun pudding bit, which is that FDA makes the Matt Slick fallacy. And you can find that on my blog. If you just Google Matt Slick fallacy, I think you'll find it. Okay, good. I think I've talked quite a while. Let's go back to the screen. I'll stop sharing my screen. Let's see what's going on in the chats. The chat's dem. Okay, I am looking at the YouTube chat, so I now actually can see if anyone has put a super chat, and if they want to do that to get my attention, they can. I guess also smash the like and subscribe button if you like this type of stuff, because it would help the channel, trying to grow the channel and do these things more often. Because it's 78 viewers, which I think is good. So it's not just Jim Bob content that gets views, but also Father Deacon Ananas content. All right, looking at the chat now. So let's see what people are saying. People are chatting about we just need J and FDA to join the chat now. Yeah, that would be funny. Oh, is that because Jim Bob is here? Oh, that's funny. Good evening, Jim Bob. I think someone was saying you were the funniest one of the bunch. Presumably that was to you, which I agree with. All right, not really seeing much in terms of questions for me. Maybe I need to scroll the fuck down. Oh yeah, I'm way out. Yes, Mannion is Calvin. Good, I got that bit right then at least. Yeah, I think maybe there's more that I could go on. Nathan says the video has frozen. I hope that wasn't like 2 hours ago. Christ. I think that was like 1 minute ago. Yes, the chat is full of Malpass's asses. Someone was trying to say that should be merch, so I should sell merch with that on it. But funny, but I don't really like that as a thing. I don't want to be associated with that the whole time. Go over the whole work sufficiency bit. I don't remember that. Joe, if you have the paper version, you can tell me what page it's on. I'll go and have a look at that. You can have a look at that now. Yeah, Malpass is the content we want, absolutely, obviously. Jim Bob's gone then, has he? Jim Bob's left the building. Oh well. The Malpass Essengers. I called the original video The Reason for Reason an asinine critique, and the reason that I did that was that he was calling well, you lot asses, malpasses asses, and asinine means both like superficial, but also donkey-like. So I thought that was kind of funny joke there. So pat yourself on the back if you got that one. Malfeasance. Well, that's just the word malfeasance. I'm not even sure if that person is making a joke or if they're just saying the word malfeasance because they like it. You are Dr. Malpass. Yes. This person's joined the stream and knows the person on stream. That's good. Okay, I think got some kind of, so this is a question, I think, from level 5 HM. Do the orders of knowledge have to do with the depth of the proposition schema or with the depth of the justification chain tree? Well, I think what you're asking me is, like when you say the depth of the proposition, you mean like how many times an operator is nested within it, so knows that P or necessarily P, that type of thing. That's what you mean with the depth of the proposition schema, or with the depth of the justification chain tree, meaning something else, which means something like how many times you have to go down. This justifies this justifies this justifies that. I mean, I didn't take it to be that second one, if I'm understanding what you're asking me there. I mean, I originally took it to be the depth of the proposition schema, in the sense it's how many times are we iterating. Second order knowledge is knowing that you know that P. That makes sense to me, because second order, what does it mean to say that it's second order? It means there's two instances of the knowledge operator in there. And if that's right, I kind of understand it. But then, as we saw, that's inconsistent with a lot of other stuff that he says, both informally and when he's writing it down and he's got time to think it through. So my contention is that there's not a good way of reconciling that. And I wanted to shout out to I'm going to Git Stanfield with a £10 super chat. Keep it going. You have the expertise. Appreciate the content. Well, I appreciate your super chat. Thank you very much for that, buddy. $10, I suppose. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. It helps me want to keep doing this type of thing, to think that people will like it. So that's fun. James, yes, I didn't say yes. I think I did say yes last time, but again, still the offer's open. You will have to move to the UK though, unfortunately, and Scotland, so it's quite cold. But assuming you can do that and you can keep me in the manner to which I've grown accustomed, then yes, they're fine. Someone's asking if I've thought about having a discussion with Donald Hoffman. I haven't. I'm not sure I know the name Donald Hoffman off the top of my head. I assume this is a philosopher, or people who talk about the philosophy of mind. I mean, I'm happy to. Philosophy of mind is not something that's not. I wouldn't describe myself as someone who knows a huge amount about the philosophy of mind. So maybe that's actually interesting for an audience, because I will be much more likely to be open to somebody persuading me to believe something, or changing my mind or whatever. But now someone else is saying Hoffman is a fraud. Well, I don't know. I'd have to look at it in order to know more. I mean, yes, in principle, I don't have a problem really talking to anybody, as long as he's not an asshole. I think that's my only kind of condition. I don't really want to just have like a sort of angry, argumentative engagement with somebody. That's just not. I can't be bothered with that. Malpassionate. That could be the. That could be my merch logo. I prefer that to malpasses and asses anyway. Landon says hi Landon, nice to see you. I hope you're doing well, buddy. So Reflective Journey says, what do you think is the motivation for writing such a shoddy paper? My guess is so they can use it as reference in debates when they're cornered. Look, I think FDA's motivations, to the extent that I'm privy to them, which is, I guess I'm not, but if I had to guess, are perfectly fine. I think he's trying to, pursue an idea that he's had, and doing so, as far as I can tell, genuinely. So I don't know if he's got any kind of hidden motivation for writing the paper. I don't think he's trying to write a shoddy paper. Weird game plan if he did. I think he was trying to write the paper so that then he's expressed his ideas, and having it written down means that you could refer to it later on, not necessarily when you're cornered, but in a debate, absolutely. So I wouldn't exactly put it like that. I think that he's failed to write the paper because ultimately he's confused about his idea. I don't think he's thought it through very well, and I don't think it's been road tested against robust interlocutors. Like Jay Dyer said, it was a good argument. So what, right? That doesn't mean anything. So I would suggest that FDA can do better, because he doesn't strike me as an idiot. Just this is not a good paper. That's all. Okay. What the hell else is going on? It wasn't a modus tollens argument. For once, this was a modus. There was a modus ponens argument, and there was a disjunctive syllogism. All right. People are saying they don't like Hoffman. He's a quantum mechanics grifter, apparently. Well, I don't know. Yeah, Nathan thinks he's a crank. Well, I think I probably will listen to him. Listen to Nathan, I mean, about that one. Is my video frozen for everybody, or is it just me? Why is my video frozen? Why am I the only fucking YouTuber that can't YouTube properly? Hopefully you can hear me, at the very least. I mean, people are still in the chat chatting, so presumably they are. Aren't they supposed to write papers as part of their job for GOB, presumably God? Yeah, I mean, I guess he should write papers, and in a sense, there's some like a rational or professional obligation to write something better than that. I absolutely agree. I think he can do better. How do I explain the 4 to 5 jump? It simply can't be from someone who genuinely cares. It's so glaring. You mean the jump from premise 4 to premise 5? So premise 4 was, you can never affirm the first order statement because you're always making second order statements. Therefore, autonomous man cannot establish. Yeah, that got to say that actually is glaring and difficult to understand. The fact that it's such a blatant non sequitur, right? The fact that autonomous man is a term that doesn't appear in the premises. It does very much. It's difficult to be sympathetic to it being like a normal sort of mistake. And actually, I forgot. I've got another clip that's relevant to that. Let me chuck this one on fast. Last clip here. Let's just play this.
See if I just say, I'll grant you whatever you think knowledge is. The issue still stands. Redefine it however you want. The issue is so fundamental and prior to all of that it doesn't really matter. Then there's no kind of way out of it. And I think that's one of the issues too that I noticed, and I put in the final section of the paper, missing the epistemological forest for the epistemic trees. That I'm like, why are these people getting so bogged down on? Be like, that's not a true disjunctive. Well, that's not how knowledge. What if they just define it this way? And I'm like, what's going on here? Like, why are they saying this? And I realized they're looking at the details and they don't see the bigger question, the kind of meta question that's being asked.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really hard to hear coming from a philosopher, because he's like oh, why are you picking holes in my argument? Why don't you just look at the bigger picture or something? Um, what are you doing? What is philosophy? You're making out you're a professional argument maker at the end of the day, right? That's what philosophy is. Um, so you can't complain when people say, pick holes in the argument. It's like saying, I'm a professional chess player. Why do people keep taking my pieces? What's going on with that? That's what you're there to do, bud. Like, I don't know, really weird. Honestly, I think that's got something to do with the people who are harassing him for things like saying, but that's not, sort of true disjunct or whatever. Is basically the argument he was gesturing towards, right? Which is the Matt Slick fallacy. If you're gonna, if you want the, if you want to argue by disjunctive syllogism and you insist that the first premise is a dichotomy, then it plays no role in the argument, right? It doesn't. Logic doesn't work the same way now in the argument, right? Your first premise doesn't do anything. The second premise, if you've got any reason to think the second premise is true, ipso facto, it's a reason to think that the conclusion is true. So it makes the whole thing pointless. You're just hiding the argument underneath a basically trivial one. That's the problem. It's not just the detail, and I'm not missing the epistemological trees. You made an argument. It's perfectly legitimate for someone to point out this type of critique. That's what philosophy is, right? I don't know. So that's bitchy moaning again, right? And you don't need to do that. Just like, don't take it so personally. Everyone's made an argument and got the inference wrong. We learn how something looks right and then it isn't. That's just what happened there. Gonna have a look at the YouTubes again, see, make sure I credit people if they say something. Okay, Tony, what's your best argument against the claim that using logical reason is circular and less grounded in a self-authenticating foundation? So what's my best argument against the claim that using logic or reason is circular and less grounded in a self-authenticating foundation? I mean, I guess, what does it mean to ground? Using logic isn't going to be circular unless I can ground it. I think basically you're entitled to use logic, for lack of a better word, pragmatically, even if you don't know what grounds it, right? I'm not forced to know how a car works in order to get in it and drive it. Right? I don't actually have to know what can ground logic in order to use it. So, even if I just go, gee, I don't know what grounds logic, I don't really see that as a particular problem as such, right? I mean, this is again comes back to that idea that, like, yeah, but your worldview should provide you with the answers to these big questions. I guess I just don't necessarily buy that in the first place. And when it comes around to, like, well, what about it has to be something that's self-authenticating? I just don't think that makes sense. How do you know that? I can imagine something telling me that it was, the grounding of logic, and then maybe further telling me I'm self-authenticating and just lying to me, or me being mistaken about I could take something to be self-authenticating and get that wrong. So even if there is something that's, so could there be something that's self-authenticating? I'm not sure. It's like, could there be something that's self-evident, right? I mean, you can sort of go, well, it's the sort of thing where anyone who understands it knows that it's true. But obviously there are some people who will claim that they understand it, but don't think that it's true. And maybe, is it in fact, a purportedly self-evident thing? Is it actually self-evident? It's not clear that you can ever really resolve that. So for something to actually be self-authenticating, it seems to me like it's kind of epistemically inaccessible to you. I mean, even if it is, it doesn't solve your problem. Like you are a bucket with a hole in the bottom that's going to leak anyway. Even if, like, someone puts in, like, holy water or something, it doesn't matter how good the thing they put in is. Your brain, your epistemic situation is imperfect. So, like, even if something was perfectly self-authenticating, you're too, like, broken and Your epistemic situation is not perfect, and that imperfection ruins the perfection of the thing anyway. So like it's something like that. It's not a particularly great way of explaining that, but there's this kind of precept myth that divine revelation gives you kind of like indubitable knowledge, access that you can't doubt or something. I say things like, couldn't an all-powerful God let you know that he exists in a way that you could be absolutely certain about? Or no, even an all-powerful God couldn't make me know something in a way that I could be completely certain about, unless somehow he completely transformed my epistemic machinery. I would have to become omniscient in order to know that I wasn't missing something. So I guess God could make me come to know something only if he could make, for certain I couldn't doubt, only if I came to know absolutely everything somehow. Even then, that might not even make sense. But basically, I just think that like it's there's a kind of like holy grail. It's kind of like the sunlit uplands that they promise you are just around the corner if only you come to believe in their version of Christianity, which is then all these epistemic issues that you're worried about go away. I just think that's bullshit. Basically, they don't. They just pretend as if they do. Okay, we've got still got plenty of people in the chat chatting stuff. I see Scott Terry has been in the chat. Now Scott is a presuppositional guy who is super smart and knows all this stuff. Probably disagrees with everything that I say, but I think is good, and he has a blog that people, if they're interested in my stuff, would like. And Scott, if you want to, I can't remember what it's called. If you want to pop what it's called in there, I would happily read that out. Bardio says, yes, exactly, Alex, about a minute ago. So whatever I was saying a minute ago, yes, I obviously also agree. I tend to say yes, exactly to everything that I say, too. And also they say, I don't know why that's not showing on the screen. Trying to show that comment on the screen now. River Station is not working. But what's my epistemology? Are you a coherentist, a foundationalist? Or where's it gone? Or something else? I mean, broadly speaking, I think I guess I would come under a coherentist view of epistemology. Certainly not a foundationalist, as you might imagine. My sort of like worries then with the notion of the self-authentication and the kind of like that axiomatic approach just never strikes me as right. Some axioms, like Cartesian idea that you could have something that would be indubitable. It's the basis of all the other things that you come to. I don't think that. I think if I have an epistemological view, it's not really very well worked out. But what I like, if you want to see something that I like, it would be the bit in Quine's Two Dogmas of Empiricism. Just to do a J Dyer, I'm going to talk about Quine's Two Dogmas of Empiricism. But if you skip to the end of that paper, which is quite complicated, and mostly he's complaining about stuff to do with logical positivism, and it doesn't matter too much. The arguments are extremely subtle as well. But at the end, the final section is called Epistemology Without the Dogmas, I think. And there he talks about a cool, beautifully well-written sketch of what coherentist epistemology would look like. And I've always found that very sort of close to my heart. Not that I'm an epistemologist in any sense, but that's where I land, I suppose. What's wrong with foundationalism? I mean, again, I don't think of myself as an epistemologist in any sense, but what I don't like about foundationalism is just, broadly speaking, the implausibility of any of the purported foundations. I mean, I guess I'm kind of also not inclined towards the foundational picture in general. Like, I mean, I'm much more relaxed about regresses than a lot of philosophers are. For instance, I don't know that I see the problem that's supposed to be contained in dependence regresses that you might find in contingency arguments and the like. And I think that spills over into my epistemology as well. I just don't feel so drawn towards insisting there has to be a sort of foundational level. That's sort of fine by me, I think. Anyway, that's not a very well worked out response. Maybe one day I'll do something a bit more like planned and organized about that, and try and explain it a bit better. Someone says, read the Stanford entry on foundationalism. It's brutal. Yes, probably is. All right, I think I'm going to just sort of wind this up now, unless there's anything in particular that's going on. Okay, and then someone says, Scott is also a kinist. Worth knowing if you're going to promote his blog, just ask him, he'll tell you. I believe kinism is basically racism, it's about the idea of different races not mixing with each other. I mean, that's not, I don't think that's cool. That's not the sort of view I want to promote. I wasn't promoting everything about him. I was just saying he's got a philosophy blog that's interesting. I don't know anything about him. And I don't mean to endorse anything else that he says. Also, I'm not going to just say because he has a political view that I don't like that I would therefore not recommend his philosophy blog. For instance, he's obviously open-minded enough to listen to me, even though I probably clearly don't agree with what he's saying in that respect. But you have to draw a distinction between those things. I mean, Rob Koons is a good philosopher, and Alexander Proust is also a good philosopher. Both of those have political philosophies that I find extreme and repugnant, but it doesn't stop me from talking to them about philosophy and respecting the work that they do. So, don't like kinism. I would argue with him about it, but I think hopefully I'm towing a reasonable line on that type of thing. Okay. What else is happening? But yeah, that was from someone whose username is just a load of letters, and it was a super chat. So thank you for the super chat, my friend. I appreciate that. Yeah, and I appreciate you saying you just wanted me to be aware, not telling me to do anything. And that's fair enough. And yeah, cool. Actually, it is helpful to know that type of thing. Oh, we've got a debate Jay Dyer comment in there. I guess I should promote that. I mean, even if I wanted to, it's just it's so. We've got another one. Debate Jay Dyer. Actually, loads of them. Basically, just loads of people saying debate Jay Dyer. No, even if I wanted to, Jay Dyer doesn't do debates anymore, and he said that he doesn't, so that means he definitely won't. I guess 1 or 2. Do I have any affirmative views on the philosophy of mind? I mean, not very well worked out views on the philosophy of mind. No, not really. I should probably come to that one day. People love philosophy of mind and they love epistemology, and those two things I just don't really have very great views about. My specialisms are in metaphysics, philosophical logic, philosophy of time, that type of stuff. Those are things that I have. Philosophy of religion. Those are the things that I can probably say something remotely interesting about. Yeah, did I refuse to debate Jay again? I kind of did. Refused is maybe a bit of a strong term. I got bored of. I changed my mind about wanting to do it. I think when I first talked to him, I did think afterwards, oh yeah, I'll talk to him again for a part 2. And then him and FDA there's an email chain I dug out the other day from years ago, after I had the debate with Jay in the first place, where those two wanted to debate me and Graham Oppie, which I always thought was really weird. And I think Graham was in the email thread. But it struck me that it would be a waste of Graham's time to do that. And the fact that they thought that that was a thing to propose also made me think less of them. Because I thought, well, don't you realize? Yeah, waste my time. I'm just, who am I? Nobody. I'm just some schmuck. Don't waste Graham Oppie's time with this fucking presup stuff, right? He's never done any work on presup as far as I know. Why would you be wanting to debate him? I don't know. Bullshit. That partly put me off it. And then it was also that just like I realized that J Dye is often an incredibly obnoxious asshole a lot. And I just didn't want to, just couldn't be bothered, basically. Okay. I think that's probably enough. Okay. So we're going to do another ortho bro. I'm going to do this as a holy trinity of ortho bros, and we're going to do some J Dyer next time. So I'll get some J Dyer content lined up. We'll have a look at some. James saying they wanted to corner Oppie with gotcha questions. So that's probably true. So I've got a little folder of clips of J Dyer that I thought would be good to do some reaction content to, but like this type of thing. But if anyone else has any ideas about those, if there's like your favorite J Dyer clip, send it my way. Chuck it on whatever YouTube. You could there's a Thoughtology Facebook. You can message me, comment anywhere on this chat, that type of thing. If you've got fun J Dyer stuff. Here's a question or comment. Review the section. The problem is whether one's supposed epistemic first principle does the work that it wants it to do. So this is going back to FDA's paper again. I think I remember where that is actually. So okay, one last little bonus bit. So I think where is this bit? So it's where he's complaining about circularity, right? Is it here somewhere? Yeah, the problem is whether one's supposed epistemic first principle does the work one wants to do. So let's just read this paragraph, right? The second critique is related to the first. It's objected that transcendentally deducing God is circular, since we cannot know he exists by some other prior epistemic means. That is, he can only be known by assuming he exists, and is a necessary first condition for the possibility of knowledge. In other words, we must assume that he exists in order to know he exists, which is circular. Okay, the problem, however, isn't with circularity per se, or whether circularity is ever allowed, since circularity can simply be an instance of self-reference. And then he's got a footnote here, which refers to another footnote. Okay, forget it. I can't be bothered to go and look at that. In principle, if one did truly find an epistemic first principle, it would be self-referencing and self-authenticating. It wouldn't be known by some prior epistemic principle. The problem is whether one's supposed epistemic first principle does the work that one wants it to do. If we don't recognize that there are presuppositions that are categorically different than what we mean by God, acknowledging that some presuppositions certainly wouldn't work as first principles, then anything and everything could be presupposed as a necessary condition for the possibility of knowledge. Consequently, if anything and everything could be presupposed, then there'd be no critique of theism, since every proposition would be no better or worse than every other proposition. Okay, it's very, I mean, it's wild, some of this stuff. So he's first of all voicing an objection, which is that there's something circular going on. Aren't you presupposing that God exists in some way? It's not just like imagining he does in order to deduce that he does or something. And obviously it's a perennial complaint about presuppositionalism, that there's some circularity going on. I mean, after all, aren't they presupposing that God exists? Yes, they are. Obviously there is something like blatantly, at least prima facie circular that's going on there. And instead of sort of dodging it by saying, well, no, it's not circular or self-referential, it seems to be sort of embracing it. So this is a classic move we see a lot with people saying, well, it's not viciously circular when it's God. It's like an okay type of circularity. And I take it that's what he's saying, is that when you presuppose God, it does the work that one wants it to do. Now, in the conversation with Jay Dyer, it there's a bit where he says he imagines talking to sort of a critic, and he voices them saying something like that the orthodox view does everything that they want an epistemology to do, but it's just that they reject it anyway. And I think his idea is supposed to be something like, well, look, it's not about the circularity, right? Everyone's circular. It's just that my circle is like doing work for me that I want a first principle to do, and that doing of the work counts in its favor. So it's like it's okay. We have to pick which circle we want to live in, and this is a good one, something like that. And I think my instinct is to say something like that the work that it's doing is often also the type of thing that's presupposed, right? So they have like a measuring stick that comes from the worldview and makes it like not really like something that we should accept from a presuppositionalist, right? Presuppositionalist wants to say something like, look, we both have like incommensurate ideas about what reality is like. Your worldview is like where God doesn't exist. Everything in that worldview is kind of meaningless and arbitrary and accidental. And in my worldview, everything's sort of coherent and meaningful and intentional and that type of thing. And actually, they're irreconcilable and they're completely different to one another. There's no common middle ground. We don't have a neutral logic or reasoning or something with which we can judge each other's worldview. All we can do is show that my worldview is coherent, whereas your worldview isn't. But even that presupposes that there's some kind of like measuring stick that you can take with you. Coherence, for instance. What if you just don't care about coherence? Or like, what if you're a trivialist, right? I'd love to see that, one of these guys arguing a presup arguing with a trivialist would be hilarious. But yeah, like what work do you want it to do? Often the stuff that they say is good work that it does is just stuff like grounding logic or making sense out of blah, blah, blah. And often those things are just like the sorts of virtues that you would look for if you are an Orthodox or if you're a Christian or whatever anyway. And the sorts of things that are not good measuring sticks if you're not like that. So sometimes I think that it's not sort of like doing the work that you wanted to do in the sense of like explanatory power and non-ad hocness and these types of like it's traditional theoretical virtues. They're often stuff that you wouldn't like, solving the one and the many problem. Like, I don't care about that. So if you're telling me, yeah, don't worry about this circularity because it solves the one and the many problem, I'm just going to think like, it's not really doing anything. Really doing anything for me. Anyway, that's a rough pass on that one. I really do have to sort of stop talking at some point. Hopefully my video didn't freeze all night. Well, I guess I'll check later. It doesn't mean it's too late now anyway, isn't it? Okay, good. Okay, last time, if this is fun, like and subscribe. I'm going to do some more of this. We're going to finish off this holy trinity of ortho bro philosophy guys next time. And then I don't know what we'll do after that. We'll do something different. Maybe we'll do something a bit more serious. But I don't know. Figure it out. Whatever it will be accidental and meaningless, no doubt. And asinine. Asinine, I think maybe that's something I want on a t-shirt. Asinine critique. All right, cool. Thanks very much. I will see you in the next one.